welcome to this evening's People's Assembly North East online meeting, where we'll be discussing the ongoing crisis of coronavirus. The title of our meeting is Fighting for Survival, Fighting for Our Futures. We had planned to have a live, real-time public meeting in Newcastle back at the beginning of March, but of course the lockdown caused us to postpone that. So we're very pleased to be able to bring a meeting to you online tonight, where we want to sort of talk around the issues that have been causing people concern and how we see things going in the future as we come out of the lockdown and towards the end of the crisis, sooner rather than later, hopefully, but who knows how long this might take. People may have seen that there are 627 more deaths today, up from just 210 yesterday. So it's quite a difficult situation, and I think the People's Assembly's position is that we should not be coming out of lockdown yet, and the figures would suggest that that is the case. Anyway, without much further ado, we'll get onto the meeting. We've got four fantastic speakers tonight. I'm really pleased that we've been able to get people that have Northeast links, but also have national figures to talk about the national situation as well. We have Laura Pidcock, who is the new National Secretary of the People's Assembly. She's been with us since 2013. Actually, she spoke at our launch meeting of the People's Assembly Northeast in September of that year, and has been along with us for a long, long time. So we're really, really pleased to have her back on board this evening. We have Alison Pollock, who is from the Keeper NHS Public. She's a doctor and a consultant in public health medicine and the director of the Newcastle University Centre for Excellence in Regulatory Science. So that's fantastic to have her along. We also have the Assistant Secretary of Gateshead National Education Union, Sarah Kilpatrick. The National Education Union have been doing a fantastic job in terms of leading on resistance to the government's policies. They took the initiative and pushed the government back and arranged to make sure that schools were closed. Not entirely closed, of course. They've been open for essential workers, children, and people have been working from home. And they're leading on the demand. They have 5 tests to make sure that our schools are not opened too early, which will cause damage to the whole situation of spreading the virus among staff and the worries and concerns that they have. And our final speaker, I'm going to hand you over when I've introduced him to, he's going to be our first speaker this evening, is Jamie Driscoll, who's the North of Tyne Mayor. He's been North of Tyne Mayor since just over a year ago now, when he was elected in May 2019. It seems a long, long time ago, I know, but he's had a very, very eventful year, particularly in declaring a climate emergency very early on. And I know he's done a lot of work in terms of getting climate change teachers organised through the United Nations programme. So really, really pleased to have all of those speakers along. And I'm going to hand you over now to Jamie, who's going to speak for about 10 minutes before we move on to the next person. So over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Tony. Tonight, I was asked to talk about the problems with the government's approach to the crisis, but I've only got 10 minutes. So where to start? As North of Tyne Mayor, I'm responsible very much for economic development. So I'll leave issues to do with, for example, contact tracing and testing to Alison, who's an expert in that field, to education, opening schools to Sarah. And I'll talk mostly about the problems with the way the government's approach to economic equality. So we've had a situation, for example, almost immediately with the lockdown, the government supported the train operating companies. These are the private companies that run our railway system. The government said, we'll cover all your losses and we'll give you a management fee. Compare that to our metro system in the Northeast on Tyneside, which is publicly owned, publicly run, and we had to fight. I've been in touch with ministers, officials, as have other people in our local authorities to try and get that money to keep that going. So we've had this mismatch in terms of how government's approached it. We've had the furlough scheme, which is absolutely the right thing to do, be supporting people to keep their jobs and get paid. But micro businesses have fallen through the gaps. We've had support for smaller businesses with business rates, but at the same time, companies like Tesco's have had 585 million quid in business rates relief as a result of this. And we've seen where there's been support for businesses to get loans. And then I've been finding out that people have gone along to get these loans and banks have been saying, yeah, but you need to put your house up as collateral for the remaining part of it. And all of this has taken ages to shift where there have been improvements. You know, we want people in work, you know, as you know, I'm a very proud socialist, and we want people to have good jobs, but work has to be safe. It always has to be safe. And the current announcements have led to so much confusion that, you know, people are thinking, do I have to go back to work? And a lot of employers are talking to me saying they don't like the confusion coming out of the government. And this leads us to a question. You know, it's very tempting to personalize this, you know, to talk about the mistakes Boris Johnson's made. But if it wasn't Boris Johnson, would it have been Theresa May or David Cameron? Would it be any better if Jeremy Hunt was there? Or Tony Blair? You know, it's about system change, because if you assume that politics is a management job, that you are there to just be a manager, you've missed the point. You know, a lot of people watching this will have seen Yes Minister, and it is pretty much a documentary. As Tony said in the introduction, I've been in office for a year now, and you get all sorts of options, but what you rarely get is the vision, and that's what we have to do. We have to transcend these day-to-day decisions. You know, should I close this? Should I balance this budget? And thinking, who should our economy be working for? What is the real big picture here? So, you know, I'm always the one who's not so much looking at what the government's done wrong now, but what we need to be putting in place for the next couple of months. And we have to ask the question, what is wealth? What is production? Because this is what's been foremost in people's minds as a result of this. We've re-identified who are key workers, which skills are valued, what is needed to keep a modern economy and a modern country fed and healthy and mobile. And my concern is that we all know that the last 10 years of austerity has left us in a very weak position to deal with this. The concern is how we're going to try and get out of it, where the burden of this money is going to go. Early on in the crisis, the government said really clearly to local authorities, spend what you need to look after this crisis, and we will refund that. And then it's been rowed back from central government. They've said things like, well, we must share the burden of cost. They've said, well, we will cover your health expenditure, but not your other expenditures. So, you know, you can't say to local authorities, close all your libraries, close all your contact centres. And then when you have no income, for example, coming through your sports centres, to not say, well, we will refund you that payment. So as a country, we absolutely need to be investing our way out of it. And that comes actually from a rethinking about what is wealth. When we look at things like investment, you know, the Treasury Green Book says, you know, you invest, and if you increase the amount of economic activity, that's automatically good. Well, we've had economic growth over the past 10 years, around 34%. And in that time, we've seen a massive increase in knife crime. We've seen homelessness increase by 169%, food bank use increase by 3,600%. So growth alone doesn't cut it. We need a system where we have power given to people, given to communities, devolved down to the lowest possible level we can, but also where regional leaders like me have the opportunity that we can do some real joined up government. For example, everybody is loving the fact that the roads are clear and we can get more people out cycling and walking. But for me to invest in that, I would have to divert money from job creation, which is what my role is and what I'm accountable to Treasury for. Despite the facts, it would make us healthier in the long run. It would make us happier. It would improve mental health. It would tackle climate change, and it would deal with things like obesity. You know, and all of these things, these health-related benefits, these mental health benefits, these productivity benefits, would be good for us. They would make us wealthier as a society, as well as making us happier. But if I invest and there's those savings, they just get captured by Treasury and they go into either tax cuts or paying off the deficit, not back to the benefits of the people. So if we have that system, that's what will make a difference. And that's what the government need to do. What we should be doing as individuals, well, join a union. The Section 44 tells you quite clearly that if you feel a workplace is unsafe, you don't have to go to work. Just as if, there was a discovery of asbestos there, you wouldn't expect people to go to work. If you think that that social distancing is not being followed, then you have that legal right to say this is an issue. And the idea that the health and safety executive can afford this, to enforce this, when they've had the kind of resource cuts that they have, and their numbers are down to a fraction of what they need to be inspecting workplaces, to be helping workplaces, because most employers do want to look after their people, not all, sadly, but most do. Then again, I think that's a little bit unrealistic. So in demands, well, obviously we need safety first. We should not be reopening schools, not until we think it's safe, until we can guarantee it's safe for kids and teachers and support staff to be going back. We need genuine funding for health services. The very fact that the government had to write off debt to NHS trusts, well, we shouldn't be having this internal market in the NHS in the first place. But secondly, we should not be operating where there's massive debt inside the system, and that's one of the driving forces on how we invest, for example, in prevention and health services. So we need these things, but if it's going to happen, it's going to require significant system change. We need devolution as part of that. It has to be done on a democratic basis. I do this anyway. We set up a citizens' assembly on climate change, which will be going ahead once the lockdown's over. We're working with the teachers to set up a cooperative so that the supply agencies are making sure. At the moment, you can have teachers on a supply basis where the schools are getting charged 250 quid a day. Teachers are getting 68 or 98 quid a day. So we need this democratizing the economy. That has to be part of our demands. But it's one thing to say we want a sensible lockdown release. We do, of course it has to be, and of course it has to be on a public health basis first. But what next? We do not need to go back to January 2020, when we had massive in-work poverty, when we had climate change rearing towards us like a juggernaut, when we had a housing crisis, when all of these crises, we had a homelessness crisis. We need to be making sure that we have this opportunity where people have seen the world isn't the way we thought it was. What we value as important work isn't what we thought it was. We have to make this moment count, and we have a duty for all of the people who've been working so hard to get us through this, all of the people who've suffered through this, all of the people who are losing their jobs through this, to build back better and to make sure we move forward to a country, to a society, and to help join up internationally to make sure that we put an economy in place that is working for the benefits of the people and not for the people who own massive amounts of assets. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Jamie. That's a fantastic start to this evening's meeting. As you said, I think the main thing is that we have to make this moment count, and there's no going back. We definitely need to be looking at system change, and we need to be reimagining the economy when things go back to get restarted. And one of the ways we want to be able to do that is through the People's Assembly. We want to encourage people to come together and talk with us and join together, have these conversations, and talk about the suggestions that Jamie was talking about in his talk there. One of the key issues that Jamie mentioned was joining a union. It's a crucial thing, particularly at the moment. I think the fact that the furlough was extended today was probably due to the fact that there has been a lot of pressure from organised workers, and they have been making demands, and given workers in trade unions more of strength recently because of this. They need to do that. So the more people are in union, the more chance we have of shaping things the way we want them to do. Before I bring in the next speaker, can I just remind people, and I encourage people to share this event, to make watch parties around it if you can do, and to follow both the North East People's Assembly page and the National People's Assembly page as we go on and move forward from here. As we're saying, as Jamie was saying, in terms of joining a union, I'm pleased that our next speaker is representing a trade union, the National Education Union, a union that's been very successfully, as I said before, making demands and leading the fight back against the government's plans to try and get everybody to work. So really pleased to be able to present the Assistant Secretary of Gateshead National Education Union, art teacher Sarah Kilpatrick. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you. In early March, I started hearing the same question from friends overseas. Why are your schools still open? As fellow teachers, parents and concerned citizens, they were all gobsmacked by the UK government's inaction on what was at that stage already an undeniable global crisis. It has since become clear what was going on. Our government had decided that the path of least resistance to the virus was the one that they had chosen for us. In the days that followed, we kept waiting for the announcements that we knew had to come, and we kept going into work. Providing PPE at that point would have been a laughable suggestion. Many of us had no access to soap and water. Even the paper towels in the art department I work in are a strictly rationed luxury. We cut them into smaller pieces to make them last longer. I started bringing in hand sanitizer to share with my students, but we knew it wasn't enough. My colleagues and I worked for hours preparing paper versions of the online work that we knew many of our students would be unable to access at home. When the announcement finally came, I felt relieved, but I also felt immense sadness for my students, particularly my Year 11s, now robbed of their remaining time in education. These last few days have been a difficult time to be a teacher in England. We have been told to find our courage and return to our classrooms. We have been accused of using this lockdown for a bit of a rest and denounced as the blob, a term fed to the press in 2014 by Michael Gove, when the profession dared to criticise the changes he forced through, reducing England's state schools to their current exam factory status and playing no small part in the recruitment and retention crisis which has plagued teaching ever since. Then, as now, our only crime, it would seem, is voicing an opinion in our field of expertise. As we all know to our cost, Mr. Gove, like so many of his friends in government, has no time for experts. If we consider the overwhelming evidence we were provided with and the extended time period we had in which we knew the threat was looming, it is clear that we don't need any specific expertise to see that our government failed to act to protect us from this crisis. This failure has cost us the lives of tens of thousands of people in this country, where the death toll is now the second highest in the world. On the day that we were finally placed under lockdown, there were 143 reported deaths linked to COVID-19 in the UK. The day after Boris Johnson announced that he wants to reopen our schools and that people should go back to work, 210 deaths were reported linked to COVID-19, with a further 3,877 confirmed cases of the virus. It has been reported today that another 627 people have died. Let me make it clear that when we talk about reopening schools, what we mean is that schools will open more fully. They have never truly closed. Children of key workers, children with an EHCP, children who are vulnerable, many have still been attending. School staff have still been going into work. Many of those worked through the Easter holidays and on the recent bank holiday when some of us were dancing the conga. Those of us who have been able to work remotely from home have been, and we have been providing online learning for our students. We're answering their questions over email, we're phoning them at home to check on their well-being. We're dealing with parental concerns. In the course of just a few days of the beginning of lockdown, my profession had completely reimagined what a school is and how it works. We care deeply about our students. This is not a profession you remain in unless you truly love it. And this is the great misunderstanding the government have about us. They constantly underestimate our passion, our commitment, and our bloody-minded tenacity to stay and to fight to improve education. They feel threatened by us, and that's why they've waged a decade-long battle to undermine us and belittle our work. The National Education Union have recommended 5 tests that the government need to meet before we can even think about opening schools more fully. Test 1, much lower numbers of COVID-19 cases. The new case count must be much lower than it is now, with a sustained downward trend and confidence that new cases are known and counted promptly. And the government must have extensive arrangements for testing and contact tracing to keep it that way. Test 2, a national plan for social distancing. The government must have a national plan including parameters for both appropriate physical distancing and levels of social mixing in schools, as well as for appropriate PPE, which will be locally negotiated at school by school and local authority level. Test 3, the government's favourite, testing, testing, testing. Comprehensive access to regular testing for children and staff to ensure our schools and colleges don't become hotspots for COVID-19. Test 4, whole school strategy. Protocols to be put in place to test a whole school or college when a case occurs and for isolation to be strictly followed. Test 5, protection for the vulnerable. Vulnerable staff and staff who live with vulnerable people must work from home, fulfilling their professional duties to the extent that is possible. Plans must specifically address the protection of vulnerable parents, grandparents, and carers. Needless to say, by any rational measure, we are nowhere near meeting these 5 tests, and therefore we cannot engage in planning for action that will undoubtedly cause a surge in cases and inevitably an even higher death toll. A petition launched by the NEU has already been signed by over 400,000 people, all of whom agree that we should only open schools when it is safe to do so. Within an hour of Johnson's speech on Sunday, 49,000 NEU members had responded to a survey in which 92% said that they would not feel safe reopening schools as proposed by the Prime Minister. The NEU have been consistently strong in their response to this crisis and have gained thousands of new members in the process, with many current members stepping up to become workplace reps. The route out of this crisis is through clear communication and unity across the workforce. We must work together to challenge the government. There is no better way to protect our workers and their families than by a strong trade union response, and the TUC have been doing excellent work in facilitating and coordinating this. As well as the support from our sister unions, the NEU welcomes the letter signed by thousands of NHS workers, which calls for greater protections for education workers. In it, they state, "There is no cure for coronavirus and there is no vaccine. It is not fair to increase teachers' risks while not knowing how many people are losing their lives because of work, because a teacher's work means sharing rooms and equipment with many people from many households again and again. Some school staff have already tragically died from the virus, and we do not want to risk any more. When the time to reopen schools does come, we will be delighted to be back with our students and to see our own children happy to be back with their friends in their own schools. But when we do return, we know that the workforce will be sadly diminished by the loss of the teachers, teaching assistants, cleaners, cooks, and site staff who have already died. There will come a day of reckoning for this government. Their choices and decisions, their inability to act have cost the lives of many thousands. Never has there been a more clear indictment of the appalling inequality in our society, now visible for everyone to see. So here we are, barely 8 weeks since the lockdown was imposed. Every day we are seeing hundreds more deaths announced and thousands of new cases confirmed. My friends overseas have started getting in touch again, and they're asking me, is it really true? Are your schools reopening? I'd like to end, if you don't mind, by reading a list. It's not exhaustive by any means, sadly, but it contains the names of some of those that we have lost from our classrooms during this crisis. Due to the government's failure to test, track, and trace cases, we can't verify where they contracted COVID-19, but we do know that it's the reason they're no longer with us. Remember their names. Sandra Martin, Bolton, teaching assistant with an enormous heart. She'll leave an enormous gap. Pamela Mistry, Brent, 50-year-old teaching assistant who recently left the village school. Melvin Gwanzura, Kensington, head of psychology and social sciences at St. Charles Catholic Sixth Form College. Jill Labram, Windsor, 52-year-old former head of Windsor Girls' School, now of Windsor Learning Partnership. Katie Horn, Burgess Hill, 21-year-old nursery worker, so full of life and happy. Barry Ashley, Oldham, site staff, his warm nature lit up the school corridors. Louisa Rajakumari, Newham, a highly talented, dedicated and experienced educator. Michael Issett, Plymouth, primary teacher, a kind, funny and caring man. Rabbi Avraham Pinter, Hackney, principal of Yesterday Hatorah Girls' School. Jerry McHugh, Greenock, Principal teacher of maths, able to inspire every single pupil. Kate Fox, Dudley, much loved literacy teacher. Emma Clark, Halton, brilliant science teacher. Indro Sen, Brent, highly regarded maths teacher and union rep. Anne Pittman, Lewisham, primary teacher and sports coach. Carol Flynn, Coventry, learning mentor, the heart and soul of her school. And Wendy Jacobs, Cumbria, gentle, caring and popular primary school head teacher.
Thank you very, very much for that, Sarah. I thought it was worth just a moment's pause there on that very poignant moment. Hopefully, Boris Johnson might listen to some of the comments and the feelings of teachers, but I do know that the National Education Union have written, I think it's something like 3 times to the Prime Minister in the last 6 weeks, and they've not received a reply as yet as to all they want to do is have a conversation about how to get back, how to make things safe before they go back. If you're watching on Facebook, you can put questions or comments onto the feed, and we'll put them to our panelists at the end. I'm just going to read out a couple of comments that have come in over the course of things so far. Someone said, Sarah is undeniably right that the union's tests must be met, otherwise it's not safe to go back. We can force the government to back down on the threat of sending people back before it is safe. And I think that will rely on union and collective action. Somebody called Rosemary says coronavirus was already rife through the country and communities by the time Boris decided to put us on lockdown. He has been going for herd immunity all along. Elizabeth says, I find it really worrying that Johnson has decided to ease lockdown, not information I shall be following at all. Somebody else says, Lindsay says, I pulled my children out a week before Boris shut the schools. He has no idea. And final one here before we move on, Corinne says, we have to re-educate or even just educate young people about the power that they hold, the importance of democracy, and skill them up on being able to hold those in power to account. And I think one of the key messages coming from what Sarah said is that actually it's not, although the spokespeople are talking about the children, there was an epidemiologist on the news this morning talking about how the children are fairly safe, not really thinking about the staff, and it's the worries and the concerns of staff that are the real worry. People are frightened for their lives, and that is the thing that we have to be concerned of before anything else. People's lives, and not the economy, or not getting back to work. So, okay, on that note, it's been fantastic to hear from the National Education Union and teachers who are at the forefront of some of the battles at the moment. But of course, the people who are at the very forefront are the NHS staff and our care workers, and everybody who works in hospitals and the caring sector. So it's really, really pleased to introduce our next speaker, Alison Pollock, who has done much work over the years in terms of campaigning against PFI and privatisation of the NHS. She's written several books about the subjects and campaigned to keep the NHS public and in public hands. So please, I'm going to hand you over now to Alison Pollock to hear the stories from the front line in the NHS. Alison.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Alison, carry on.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. It's very nice to see everyone and to hear Sarah and Tony. So if my internet is a bit unstable, so if we lose sound, perhaps you can let me know. Oh, can you hear me?
Everything's fine, Alison. You just carry on. We'll
Sure.
tell you if it
Okay.
goes well.
We froze. Okay, we froze. So I'm also a member of the Independent Stage Committee, which has been convened by and I really hope of the first meeting, which came out today. We had a press conference and there are 19 recommendations, and I think they pretty much will chime with all that you've been talking about today. We were convened because there's increasing SAGE is not really trained in what they can say, and there's been a lack of transparency about the whole process of SAGE, including the members and the scientific evidence. So we had one success, which was last week, just after our first meeting, published the subcommittees. But some people chose to remain anonymous, and I think that's because I don't see why anybody. But we were looking on the priorities to help support a gradual release from social distancing. And of course, we couldn't not help but look at some of the factors that contributed to us having to go into lockdown and the delay, and some of the things that need to be put in place. And the World Health Organization has already given a framework. And also, it's also just sent out guidance on schools. And I think this guidance on schools is very powerful because it will help unions argue for the restoration of resources that they have lost, both for staffing and in schools. I suppose the thing that's worrying me most, and also very vulnerable groups, people with learning difficulties, single households, single parents, and of course, older people. And what's become very obvious is that while we've been asked to stay at home and protect the NHS and save lives, what's become very obvious is the government hasn't played its part protecting those in nursing homes and social care. And of course, the reason for this is that social care back in 1990 was taken out of health in many ways. So many of the people that would have been in the NHS in the 1980s are now in nursing homes and residential care homes, private responsibility. But the other issue has been, of course, that nursing homes have been subject to more privatization than any other country in the West, even more so in England than the US. So 86% of nursing homes are owned by private for-profit chains and equity. And of course, those shareholders will need to take out the profits and make returns. And that also has a direct impact on staffing levels and quality of staff. And the grades of staff, the qualifications of staff. So what we have seen, of course, over time, and reduced access to the sorts of services that people in nursing homes really need. And that includes speech therapy.
Interrupt a moment.
Yep.
You're cutting in and out a little bit. Can you just try switching your screen off and see if it works better without the video? It might be better for the moment without the video. The sound might be better.
If I know.
Just mute your video.
The internet's very unstable.
Yeah, try that.
Unmute, okay?
Okay,
Can you
yeah.
all hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, yeah.
It's not great, I'm afraid, the internet.
No, well,
Where do you want me to start? What did you not hear? So what I'm going to say is, in case you can't SAGE report, I think they will very much chime with all your concerns. And I hope we've gone some way to address them. We are recommending to health and social care, and especially the protection of care workers and staff. But also we're recommending much more social protections for people who are on low pay, unemployed, and in particularly vulnerable situations. So feed back to us anything else that you would like to hear. Underpinning our recommendations is a recognition that what has happened is we have lost access to local health bodies and increasingly local health services. Health services have become uncoupled as a result of the internal market and the Health and Social Care Act, and privatisation and fragmentation. Our report recognises the enormous fragmentation that is contributing to the delay and the problems. And of course, that fragmentation is also going on within schools and in other. It has to be to rebuild and restore capacity and put in the public health measures, but also to put in the measures which protect the groups who are most at risk. And of course, they are mainly older people, but they're also the people who are affected particularly badly by lockdown.
Alison?
So the older, we know that most of the deaths are occurring. You can't, okay.
Alison, can you hear me?
Okay, I'm just going to finish.
That's great. Yeah, it was just probably a good point there just to finish off, because it is cracking up quite a lot now.
Okay, okay. Just read the SAGE recommendations, the 19 of the independent SAGE committee report published today.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much to Alison there. I inadvertently had a technical upset with myself while I was trying to sort that out. But thanks very much. It was very difficult. I understand how difficult it was because it was breaking in and out there. But some excellent points there from Alison. And I know I heard her speak at a Cooper NHS public meeting only a week or two ago, where she was very forcefully putting the arguments about how social care needs to be brought under the auspices of the NHS in the future, and not the breakup, and things need to be put back. But also the criticisms of the SAGE group there, I think, have a lot in them, and it's clear that despite the government taking supposedly scientific advice, they're interpreting it in ways that are not best suited to saving lives, as we've seen with so many health and care workers losing their lives, as well as teaching staff, as Sarah pointed out earlier. But thanks anyway again for that. Before we're bringing our final speaker, can I just remind people again that if you've got comments, or particularly if you've got questions to put to any of the panelists, please put them on the Facebook feed. Type them in there and put comments in. We'll see if we can get them and put them to people after we've heard from our final speaker, which is Laura Peacock, who is now the National Secretary of the People's Assembly. Sarah, Laura, are you there?
I am here.
Laura, hi Laura, there you go.
I just need the host to put my video on.
Okay, I'm sure that's happening just
Yeah.
now.
It's happening. Hi, everybody. And it was such a shame that we couldn't hear completely unbroken what Alison Pollock was saying, because she is absolutely superb. And it would be great if we could get a link up to the Alternative Sage recommendations. That would be absolutely excellent. And I do feel still quite affected by Sarah's contribution because that is what this is about, isn't it? Every single one of those names that she read out. And that's in one sector, by the way. So that's in the world of education. Those people have lives, stories, experiences. They were going to have more experiences had they not been caught and overwhelmed by this virus. And we don't know the in-depth, every single circumstance of each one of those persons' lives, but we know as a system, the coronavirus has taken lives that could have been preventable, in that it has been said before on this Zoom call and by many other people much more qualified than me, that there was a real slowness in the lockdown. So that feels quite difficult, doesn't it, as a movement, as a class of people, that we are in real time living through something, and we're living through it all from in our own living rooms, or even if we are able to go out, we're experiencing this as a set of individuals. And that's kind of a theme for what I'm about to say, because I think the question for the movement is how we collectivize this all of the time. Because I think one of the things that the government wants is for us to see this, and I think Sunday's announcements and the kind of ambiguity around them wants us to see this as like our individual problem. Should I go to work? And I think we have to push back against that all the time and collectivize it and say, should this sector go back? Is it right for this sector to go back? Can that sector be safe? And if not, and the trade union movement are currently navigating this, then they don't go back. And that's our demand. I think it's a really surreal moment, isn't it? I do think meetings like this are very important, not least because you get to connect with other people. You kind of don't feel lonely. It is a lonely experience living through a global pandemic. And about 40 minutes or whatever ago, I was bathing my little boy and then straight into talking about coronavirus. And there is no doubt about it that the world will be changed. Our futures will be changed because of this virus and because of the government's handling of it. Let's just kind of recap on some of the things that people have said, which I completely agree with, by the way. The government was slow to lock down. Society was ahead of the government. Football matches, concerts, left meetings, other meetings were being cancelled before the government decided to lock down. We know that the government had early warnings way before they decided to take the decision to lock down. We also know that the government carried out something called Exercise Cygnus, which was about modelling what the threat would be. And yes, it was a model on a different kind of virus, but it was about a serious health threat to the nation, and that they ignored many of the findings. In fact, the final report I don't think has ever been published into Exercise Cygnus. And quite a few ministers, government ministers, have been caught out on what Cygnus is and was, but they had the warning signs. And in fact, you know what? I even feel a bit complicit in government propaganda in calling this a lockdown, because it's never really been a full lockdown. Many of the easings that we are taking, when other nations have eased their lockdown, it's kind of much more stringent still than some of the measures that we have had. But the reason I feel complicit is in the propaganda and the packaging and the psychological management of this virus, and how people see it, is because the government have never produced a full and extensive list of all of the industry and all of the work that is permissible, and all of the work and all of the industry that is not permissible. And that's very important, because again, if we think about collective versus individual, you have to wonder, am I covered by key worker status? Am I not covered by it? My employer's telling me to still come in. I don't really have any rights. I'm on a 0-hour contract. I haven't got a contract. I've got a temporary contract and I'm really hoping that they renew it, rather than having that kind of state clarity to say, actually, no, just because you are covered by telecoms, we don't want you in a call center with hundreds of people on the same floor, some who might have the virus, and basically selling products. That is not essential work, and we know that's happening. We know that some people covered by the driver key worker status, for example, are delivering kitchens, or certainly things that aren't essential right now while we're trying to contain what is a deadly virus. And so I think this is a class issue. It's a class issue because there is a dependence on what kind of employment relationship we have with how safe you are going to be. So if you have a proper contract of employment, if you are even better in a recognised trade union, so your workplace, there is a recognition agreement that your trade union will negotiate on your behalf, all of the time, the safety that you experience increases. If you are some of the wealthiest people, and you can see this in data, this isn't my opinion, or those people who are able to do their jobs from home, of course, your house is like a physical barrier away from the virus. And those who are in some of the lowest paid jobs, certainly not lowest skilled as they once have been described, but certainly, hopefully, no more. Some of those jobs that are now termed as key worker status, you are on the front line in terms of exposure of the virus. So, Sarah read out the names of all those who had died in the education world, but in transport, we know, and then of course in health, in those care sector jobs too. And so we have to be saying, and I saw so many memes at the weekend that were in this spirit, and I said the class system is alive and well, and I meant it, because whether or not you are exposed to the virus is very much dependent on what kind of work you do, and how much you are paid, and what kind of employment relationship that you have. And I think that for most people in the sectors that Boris Johnson announced would go back at the weekend, or most sectors that actually have never really been locked down, physical distancing doesn't exist in many of those workplaces. I'm trying to think of an environment where physical distancing actually is possible for many of those workplaces, unless you're like a lone signal person in like a signal box somewhere remote. Maybe you will be working alone, but most people, let's be honest, are interacting with other people either because of the modes of production, or because they have to interact with other people in the commodities they trade, or the sales that they are making. So it isn't a reality that we can keep lots and lots and lots, millions of people safe at work. It just isn't. And it isn't for a couple of reasons. And this is reflected in the downgrading of the health and safety guidance. So at one point, the emphasis on physical or social distancing, as it's called, has used to say that it should be strictly adhered to, and now it's been changed to where possible. So again, if you think about that individual versus the collective, individual workers are going to have to say, I don't feel safe. The employer might refer to the guidance, and of course there are loads of brilliant employers that are in it with the workers saying this isn't safe, this isn't possible. But where you have those unscrupulous or exploitative employers, they'll say, well, we're physically distant where possible. The end. And we know that there's a hollowed out health and safety executive, hollowed out local authority inspectors that aren't able to make these inspections. So I think it's absolutely right that the trade union movement is calling on the hundreds of thousands of trade union health and safety reps to be given those powers to carry out those inspections, and if and where work is not safe, to say that that work should not continue. But I think all of the ambiguity on Sunday was deliberate, because we have to always ask ourselves, who are the government acting on behalf of, and what are the government's priorities? So of course there will be intense pressures from the market, from some of the wealthiest people, to get workers back to work, and and that is the tension therefore exists between those set of pressures, those incredibly powerful and wealthy people who want to see consumption back up and running, want to see their profits return, and those people us in the movement, the trade union movement, and in all of our activist groups kicking back, and the pressure is those two forces at this point in time. And that is, in my view, that gives us power to say that we will collectivize, we will make sure we are standing in solidarity with workers, we will join in. If we're not a teacher, it doesn't matter if they're telling us that it's not safe right now, it's not safe right now, we will stand in solidarity with those people. And any other sector that tells us that they need our solidarity at that time, because we have to be that counterforce, we have to be that pressure on the government. And the pressure has worked. As I said at the very outset of this conversation, the pressure's worked because we know they locked us down probably when they didn't really want to. And they have carried on the furlough scheme, although I know it is by no means perfect, the announcements today, because I think there's talk of employers subsidising some of that furloughed money, which could lead to increased redundancies. I completely understand, but even the continuation of the scheme wouldn't have happened without pressure from the trade unions and the movement as a whole. Look, there are huge pressures on working people right now. The scandal over protective equipment, that it can't procure the protective equipment, that there is mass privatization. So Alison described this in a talk she did for us last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, where she talked about in social care there being no central levers of control. I think that's a perfect summary of the state of privatization. Actually, in situations like this, when it's privatized, the state doesn't have a grip on what is going on in each of those sectors. So I know in some of the industrial conversations that I've had, the difference between local authorities and the private sector in terms of their capacity to procure hand sanitizer, the highest spec wipes that they need for is stark. You know, the private sector seem to struggle much more. So we need to look beyond this crisis. We obviously have to make sure that we have our eye on the demands of everybody within the crisis too, but we have to be active when we come out of this crisis, because I have absolutely no doubt, as sure as night follows day, that there will be a rewriting of history. And I said this last week at another People's Assembly meeting, but they will want us to forget Cygnus, they'll want us to forget the catastrophe over PPE, they'll want us to forget the ambiguity, the delay, the dither, the way that some people have completely fallen through the gaps in terms of their actual income during this crisis. They'll rewrite history, and then they'll try and make us pay for it too. So we have to be demanding as a very basic that we are not paying for this, whilst there are billionaires in existence who have enough wealth. It should not be working people, especially not the working people who've actually saw us through this crisis, nursed us back to health. We shall not pay for it. And we must be demanding much more. And the much more is up to us, isn't it? So this is about making sure that all of the fragilities, so the privatization, the huge cuts, which actually lead to much more expensive kind of cures further down the line, the huge cuts, so the change in nature of the state, the mass in-work poverty, precariousness, insecurity, that all of that, we're not going to have it again in this new society, because we know if a disaster comes down the line, if a health emergency comes down the line, it exacerbates all of those inequalities, and we just won't accept it. We are interested in a new world. We're not interested in going back to normal, although I'm sure many people are interested in a bit of normality returning. I get that, but no political normality. We have to create a new world, and that's where I would love you, and this is my closing comments, Chair, I'd absolutely love anybody who is watching this, anybody who has thought about getting involved in any kind of activism, but thought, I have no idea where to start. I've got absolutely no idea. I don't want to speak at a public meeting. I don't know enough. It doesn't matter. The People's Assembly can be a home for your activism. Just get involved, like the People's Assembly page. This is a local meeting of the Northeast. It doesn't really matter if you're watching from elsewhere. Get on your local page. Tony, who's chairing this, is a lovely person. I'm sure he'll agree. He will welcome you with open arms. Excitingly, we've just agreed today that there is going to be coming, and we haven't got a date for it yet, but it will be in the next month. There's going to be an activist conference where, if you do want to get a bit more active, there'll be all sorts of training opportunities for you to get involved in. And we've also decided that there will be a national protest against the government and in favour of our demands. And we're calling it Day X because obviously we are not assembling now while it is not safe to do so. But as soon as it is safe to do so, and that will be a collective decision, we will take to the streets against this government and unleash all our pain and anger and all of our vision, essentially, because we have the vision about what will come next. So the bottom line is, get involved. You're not alone. You can be part of this amazing activist network. And just thanks so much for watching.
Thanks for that, Laura. That's fantastic. As you said there, the People's Assembly there was set up against austerity because of the 10 years of Tory cuts that we've already suffered, and it's likely that we'll be coming out to further cuts and austerity at the end of all this. One of our other people have been commenting on the Facebook, Teresa Easton, said that getting involved in People's Assemblies North East is a real practical way of affecting change, working with trade unions, local campaign groups, and being part of a national campaign. I think that's a message that there Laura finished with as well. A couple of the key messages I think that have come out both from Laura and from all the other speakers really is about joining a union. The unions at the moment are a key issue. Well, the last few news bulletins I've heard, people have been talking about how workers need to go to their unions and negotiate with their unions, regardless of whether the unions themselves, the government is actually listening. That is the strongest way to do that. We know that unity is strength, but the biggest strength is in collective action, and it's about coming together with other workers and making demands together. So there's only got a few minutes left, and there were a couple of questions posed to the panelists from the feed, which I'll just drag up. I think one was particularly to Sarah. So Sarah, if you can prepare yourself to have a go at answering a question here. There. Oh, one of the comments was a guy called Stephen Bruce says there's no chance he's sending his kids back to school whilst the virus is so more prevalent than it was at the beginning of the shutdown. That seems to be a thread running through a lot of people, and we know that parents are in support of teachers not going back just yet from some of the petitions that have been around. Yeah, there's a question from Matty Lacey. Not necessarily, I know it's Sarah's an artist, it's about artistic, as you said. So how would you advocate artists in the creative industries organise and empower themselves? I don't know whether that's one specifically of it. You don't work in the artistic industries, Sarah, but you are an artist. So I don't know, would you like to have a bash at answering that?
Absolutely. I would recommend that you get in touch with a fantastic comrade, Teresa Easton, who founded the Artists Union. You can find the Artists Union. They will be readily available to Google and Twitter. She's a phenomenal advocate for fellow artists, so look for her.
Excellent, very, very, very good. Christine Smith also made a comment that there's 65,000 WASPI women in the Northeast, many, many more thousands across the country, and said that they've all given something and they're receiving nothing. You know, that's the situation people find themselves in. So joining a union is one of the key messages in the current circumstances. If you're already in a union, encourage lots of other people to join. We know that there are nowhere near as many people in trade unions now as there were a few years ago. So really now is the time to ask people to join a union. I know that my union, the National Education Union, has had thousands of new members joining during this crisis, and I think that has been reflected in other trade unions as well. So do ask your colleagues to join a union. And the other key message I think that's come out of tonight is the fact that we need to look beyond the crisis into what's coming in, and we need system change. We don't want to go back to the old normal. We want a new normal of somewhere or other. So just in terms of that, maybe just a comment from each of you, as we've got a couple of minutes left. Just how do you think we might envisage the new normal? Should we start with you, Jamie?
This has shown us the wiring of the way our society is organised has been exposed. you know, it's times of rapid change when people notice things that they're perhaps taken for granted for a long time. This isn't the last crisis we're going to face. We have a debt crisis. We have, you know, it's been said that it's a choice between socialism and barbarism. Well, it's actually, I think it's a choice between socialism and everyday crises. The everyday crisis of personal debt. Half of the people in our society don't have any money. A mental health crisis is right. We've social isolation, housing. And these are all breeding grounds for the far right. So we always, the seeds of the new are there in the old. And this is not about reformism. We need these proto elements of socialism. We need, if you want to do something, get involved in something concrete and tangible. Join a trade union, and don't expect the trade union to do everything, because, you know, trade unions are not, you know, full of magicians. But join a community activist group of some time, or a social enterprise, because this is the way that we learn to reorganize our society and production. And join a political organization as well. You know, obviously I'm a Labour politician, Laura was an MP, you know, and it's no good hoping that we're going to persuade Tories to do the things we want us to do. We have to replace the Tories at the end of the day.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, and join the People's Assembly. The People's Assembly is a place where people of political persuasions or none can get together and organise and build things. Over to you, Alison. Shall we see if we get your see if your audio works?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Address just quickly on the question of how would you see the new normal?
Well, one of the things that's very much worrying me is the panic and hysteria that people got into about COVID. And I think it's really important that people try and understand what's happening in their local authority areas. This outbreak isn't one big outbreak. It's made up of lots of tiny little outbreaks. It's like little fires burning, but they're not all burning in different parts of the country at the same rate and speed. So in many parts of the country, the fire is going out and was never very great in the first place. But of course, in other parts like Birmingham and Hampshire and London, it was huge. And so I think it's really important, before we have a reflex jerk reaction, we have to understand what's going on in our local communities in terms of cases, and whether the local communities have put in place the mechanisms like contact tracing and public health to be alert when new cases come, and the protections for local school and staff. But I do think a blanket national lockdown, this time has come for an end. And I think trade unions are going to have to start to look and work much more with local government to see which areas is a very little risk and low risk. Because remember, children are not at risk, really low risk if at all. And neither are young people, and many of the teachers who are young people. So it's really important that the unions begin to understand this epidemic and what it means in local areas, and not have a knee-jerk reaction, but actually make sure that the resources that have been ripped out are put back in as part of the conditions for going back. And this might mean zoning. It might mean some areas going back sooner than others, rather than a complete lift up of all national restrictions. So I think we need a much more intelligent approach. And it's really vital that the unions and local communities are involved and take part in that.
Thanks for that, Alison. That's great. Yes, I mean, it is all about dialogue, I think. Unfortunately,
and not getting into hysteria and panic and knee-jerk reactions. It's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Sarah will probably say something on this. I'll bring you, Sarah, in next, but I know the National Education Union has been trying to have that dialogue with government. And I know you mentioned the situation about resources and the need for different resources, but there's also, there's been a time for reflection and look at a different way of doing education. Is that something you see for the new normal?
No, well, I'm very worried about it.
Alison, I was putting that to Sarah now, passing it over to
Sarah. I think this is, you know, in every crisis, we find opportunity, and the government have failed to listen to us for 10 years. And we have been saying the same thing for all of those 10 years. Listen to us, we are the experts. This is our profession. The needs of our students are at the heart of every single thing we do. So when we're saying that constant testing, constant assessment of children starting from age 4 with the baseline test and all the way through school, when we say that that has absolutely no benefit to our students and actually has a negative impact on their mental health and well-being, it has a negative impact on the curriculum that we offer, and it is causing teachers to leave in their droves, listen to us. We do genuinely know what we're talking about. In terms of a summing up comment, I was listening to what Laura was saying about, you know, finding some sort of political foothold somewhere, finding a space to become an activist. And I think it's so important. We've been told as a profession repeatedly over the last few days not to politicize this. And we've been accused of political posturing by certain MPs. There's constantly a drive to silence people who know what they're talking about when they disagree with the government. And if I could just quote Laura from the Durham Miners Gala, where she said to fill every space with your politics and to never be afraid to speak up. I think that's the thought that I'd like to leave this on.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, that is a very good point, to fill every space with the politics. There was a comment from Elizabeth Greener online as well, saying that we need to educate young people as to the why unions came about and working class history. And that's something that we could do with more space of in schools. I know it's not really there. And I'm sure you have some thoughts on that yourself, Laura, in summing up and just saying how you see the new normal taking shape.
Yeah, I think that there's just a couple of things I'd like to say. So I kind of hear what's being said about, you know, not being hysterical about the virus in and of itself, because, you know, I understand and we've heard so much about how this is affecting people physiologically. And I think my main concern, though, is Tony, and this is kind of the root of probably all our activism, is that if it's just about who can afford to protect themselves and shield themselves completely and take themselves away from risk, then it is only going to be the wealthiest in society that do that. So that's why we call for kind of state-driven approaches and employment related approaches, because I don't want anybody, and this is what I'm seeing from some of the conversations around different industries, I don't want anybody to have to face the choice of leaving their homes. You know, I know of people who have got in touch with different trade unions who are worried because they've got somebody in the extremely vulnerable or shielding category, but they don't have from their employer the right to stay at home for whatever reason, and because the state hasn't been clear about that exact the financial relationship for that person, they leave home and risk themselves, even if they're asymptomatic, themselves coming home and endangering their partner. What I want in that situation is the state to say, do you know what? Life is number one. It's so precious. I want to remove that worry from you. Whether you might be a carrier or not, or whether your child could deal with it very well or not, I want to remove that worry from you, because workers, what is kind of at the core of many of us is worry. It's endemic worry. It's stress about what might come and what will happen if our wages are completely taken away from us. So I think that's, if we're thinking about the new normal, that's like the basis of what I'll be campaigning for, is a complete revolution in workers' rights. We have to shift the balance of power away from those who at the minute hold all of the cards, who hold all of the power, and collectivize in a way that brings about all of the things that we spoke about. So a ban on 0-hour contracts, an end to poverty pay, so the minimum rate of pay actually enabling poverty. So the current minimum hourly rate of pay keeps people in poverty. How have we just accepted that as a society, that people will get into debt when they are working sometimes 40, 50 hours a week? How have we accepted that the kind of gender segregated nature of work means that that 77% of women in this crisis who are classed as key workers are also in poverty pay? You know, so people that are cleaning the virus from surfaces to keep you and I safe are going to food banks. I mean, that's quite incredible. We cannot return to that kind of society once we're out of this. And I've had enough, actually. And I'm glad Sarah reminded me of something that I said in the past, because sometimes you can feel like, oh, yeah, you know, we have to get behind the government. Of course, we all wanted the government to succeed in their strategy against this virus, because it's about our relatives, it's about our loved ones and our communities. Nobody would have wanted them to fail. However, they have, and they are failing, and they're failing our class, they're failing our communities, they're failing the most vulnerable in society, that is for sure. And we will hold them to account for that. And we will say, absolutely no more of this. We will make it a political issue. Dying because you have to go to work is a political issue. Not having access to health is a political issue. Not being able to see your relatives, the confused narrative is a political issue. It's all political. We shouldn't be ashamed of it. And we will protest, we will collectivise when it is right to do so. And fundamentally, we'll be in solidarity with those people who we are currently clapping every Thursday, but when they take industrial action, when they're asking for a pay rise, we'll all be there in solidarity with them. And solidarity at the People's Assembly North East. No way did I speak at something in 2013. It feels like 3 decades ago, not just a few years ago, but you inspired me to get involved in action against austerity. So thanks very much. And I hope this meeting can pull even more people into that struggle.
Thanks for that, Laura. You did make that thing in 2013, because I very much remember making a telephone call to you to ask you if you would come and speak. So, but you're right, it does seem a long, long time ago now. And yes, we do need to build something new. And I think one of the key things about organisations like the People's Assembly is it will bring together masses of people, numbers of people. And I know my experience, my political experiences, is when you get lots of people together in a room, they have solutions. They have solutions to the biggest of problems. The most fantastical problems that face us can be solved when people are asked themselves to do it for themselves, rather than it being done to them by the state, by the government, whose first interest is not really actually in people's well-being and their lives, but is in profit and the motive and making more money. So we do need to come out of this with a change in focus, and we need to be putting people's lives, workers' lives, first. And we need to be looking what the crisis has demonstrated, of course, is which jobs, which work is essential, because we've been relying on essential workers for the last 6 or 7 weeks. So now we know what the essential work is that needs to be done in the society. We can come together and plan to organise around doing the essential work that we need in the interests of the many, not in the interests of the few. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight. Just to encourage everybody who has been viewing and watching, please do keep like the pages, go and keep in touch with us, join us, even consider donating to the People's Assembly. We do need money to run things and keep things going. There are donate buttons you will find on some of the links. The next national meeting is this coming Thursday, making sense of the crisis. The next meeting is on the dangers of lifting the lockdown, so it's clearly a key issue of the moment. So please tell everybody about that, encourage people to come along, share it, and of course the key message from tonight: join a union, encourage other people to join a union, and use your collective strength to make sure that we have the demands met, that we put, that we're listened to, and things are not just done to us, that we actually have things, we're part of a negotiation, we're part of a dialogue that wins things for ordinary working people. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to Sarah, thanks to Alison, thanks to Jamie, and thanks to Laura, and thanks to everybody once more. See you all on Thursday. Thanks very much. Good night.